and Mitzvah Hashem will see some fascinating things. We begin with the following question. It's actually related to today's Chumash in two ways. The Iker discussion will be about Yaakov and Esav being twins and who was actually older than the other. But we begin with something else related to today's Chumash, and that is Esav selling the Bechor. Yaakov offers him lechem, bread, lentil soup, and Esav says, that's it, all right, it's all yours. And he sells Yaakov his Bechor, Vayivez, and Esav belittles it. Mainly he sold it for something chashuv, it was just for bread and lentil soup. Why Taka did Yaakov give the bread? That wasn't even part of the discussion. Esav just said, Halateni no min ha'adam azeh, give me that red soup. Yaakov threw in the bread to sweeten the deal. I mean, what's the bread going to do? So many Mefarshim say that Yaakov was worried that Esav later would say, come on, I was about to die of hunger, I had no choice, I was under duress, and therefore the sale was null and void. So therefore Yaakov fed him up on bread. Now you're no longer under duress, you're not starving anymore, you're not about to faint and from being famished and hungry. So that was the purpose of the bread. Then he gave him the lentil soup. The truth is, the Chidah in his Sefer Midbar Kedemus quotes a Kabbalistic tradition. Avraham Avinu had a special sword which had the name of the Eibush engraved on the sword. It's probably how he killed all the four kings, if he killed all of them, because one of them was Amraphel, which is Nimrod, and we have a tradition that perhaps Esav killed Nimrod. But Avram had this special sword. It could be that it was already Mesushelach's sword. The Arizal discusses Mesushelach had a special sword with which he would destroy all negative forces. A magical sword, and he lost it right before his Einokol Noach was born. Right, exactly, yeah. Well, that was over there.
Why don't you shoot him?
Exactly. And it may have been the same sword. Either way, Avram bequeathed the sword to Yitzchak, and Yitzchak gave the sword to Yaakov, not to Esav. Although Yitzchak loved Esav, he didn't trust him with the sword, he gave it to Yaakov. So the Chidah quotes that Esav was being hunted down by Nimrod, and Esav needed that sword to knock off Nimrod. And it was really the sword that was given in exchange for the Bechor.
The sword or the jacket?
The jacket, no, the jacket was something else. The jacket, many hold, Yitzchak gave to Esav. The clothes, the special begodim.
You said maybe Nimrod had the jacket and Esav wanted that.
The Machlokes Medrashim. If Nimrod had the Rashi says that those special clothes, Rashi brings this week's parsha, that Yaakov got them from Esav. But there's another Medrashic tradition that fakert, that was... So Rashi quotes that Esav had taken them from Nimrod. Chamdon min Nimrod took them from Nimrod. There's another Medrashic tradition that fakert, the reason that Nimrod wanted to kill Esav was to get those clothes from Esav, because Esav was given them by Yitzchak. But for some reason, Yitzchak may have given Esav the clothes, the special begodim, but not the sword that he gave to Yaakov. Because Esav was going to fight Nimrod, he needed that sword. So the Chidah says it was really the sword that was the exchange for the Bechorah. And this was just the lunch. This was just the meeting. You do the exactly. No, you end the deal over going out to eat in a restaurant. So that was the meal that the Torah discusses. Either way, the Rishonim all want to know, how could Esav have sold his firstborn rights to Yaakov? There's a basic rule in the laws of sale: you can only make a transaction on something which is tangible, something which exists. Something which is going to exist in the future, known as a dover shaloi bala elam, something which doesn't yet exist. For example, the rights of a firstborn. We'll see if the word firstborn is actually a correct translation for Bechor, but let's assume it is. If the rights of the firstborn to get double from the father's inheritance, that's something of the future. Yitzchak was alive as well. How could Esav sell over the rights? It's true, Yaakov was giving him something tangible, a sword, bread, lentil soup, but l'chor the kinyan shouldn't work. You can't pass something over which doesn't yet exist. That's the shaila everybody asks. Every Mefaidish and his second cousin's nephew also asked the question. So look at number one. Number one is a tshuva from the Rivosh. Rabbi Yitzchak ben Sheshes. See, he was one of the last of the Rishonim, in Spain. He passes away in the year 1408. But the last number of years of his life, he lives in Algeria. He jumped ship from Spain, persecution, and he went to Algeria. He and his student, known as the Rashbats, Reb Shimshon ben Tzemach, last name Doron. The two of them were in Algeria. They didn't. There was a bit of friction between the two, unfortunately. But on the whole, they respected each other. The Rivosh was the teacher, the Rashbats was the student. They're both very important halachic sfarim. They're both considered Rishonim, even though they're towards the end of the Rishonim. Says the Rivosh, Oid Kosavta, you wrote, he's telling the person that he's responding to. Shera Isa Kosov, you saw written b'shem Harav Rabbeinu Yankiv ben Harosh Sal. Rabbi Yaakov, the son of the Rosh. Who's Rabbi Yaakov, the son of the Rosh? The Tur, the Baal HaTurim on Chumash, and the first Shulchan Aruch known as the Tur, that was written by Rabbi Yaakov, the son of the Rosh. Shekasav, that he writes b'shem Aviv HaRosh, on the name of his father. The Hamakne Dover Shaloi B'Loilam, if you bequeath something that doesn't yet exist. Im Nishbal Kacha, if you accompany it with an oath. Shekana HaKoine, the choir acquires. Vafilu Meis HaMakne, even if the Makne dies before the thing comes to actual existence. Hamekach Kayim, the deal is done, the item is bought, the transfer is successful. V'rayase, what's the proof of the Rosh? From the Bechor that Esav sold Yaakov. Uksiv Hishavali. Right? There was an oath. Yaakov asked for an oath. V'amarta, and the Rivosh tells this person, you asked, I should tell you what my opinion is on the matter. So apparently there's a tradition, and this is not written, in this generation or last generation. This is going back to, the Rosh passes away in the year 1327. The Tur passes away 15, 20 years later. This is around the year 1400. So it's a couple decades after the Tur passed away. So this is mamish like B'Shas Maisa. There's a tradition going around that the Rosh holds. It's a very simple way to bequeath something which doesn't yet exist. Just give an oath. What would be the logic of that? The logic would be, many poskim say the reason why you can't sell something which doesn't yet exist is because we assume that neither party is goymer das. Neither party really, it's not a real agreement because it's just the whole thing's in the air. It's airy-fairy, and therefore no one's really too serious about it. That's the reason. And Bechor, it's a general rule in Kinyanim that in order for Kinyan to work, you have to be serious about it.
Future babies of an animal can't be sold. Commodities.
Right.
Cannot?
Right. Correct. Right. Because since it doesn't yet exist, no one's really taking it seriously.
Not allowed by Torah.
What?
The whole futures market that we have in
Commodities.
Or maybe you make a
To
swear
sell
every time you
something.
do
All
a
right.
trade,
Well,
you make a
okay.
swear.
You have to look at each situation. Is a taka not yet existing, or does some part of it exist? Some poskim hold. If you sell two things, one thing does exist and one thing doesn't, then the Kinyan can work on both. Some poskim say, once, if it's a package deal, if it's a package deal, I'm selling you two things at the same time. So since you acquire the thing which is tangible,
Yeah.
exactly.
Half is released, half is not released.
Davar shaloi bala ilam.
If you sell something, but it's not fully, in other words,
Right.
included in something that's not sold.
Right.
Yeah.
There's
What's this whole raya though? Before Mountain Terror.
okay, good, right. Yeah.
What are we even talking about?
That's a good question. I was just about to say something. Oh, what it was. The great Maharit, Rabbi Yosef Trani, was one of the greatest Sephardish poskim about 400 years ago. He had a yeshiva in Svas, but he was always traveling to Turkey to collect funds. He had such a following in Turkey that he ended up opening a yeshiva in Turkey. The Balabatim that he was traveling to support his yeshiva, he said, you know what, he left his yeshiva and became a rabbi of the Balabatim. Interesting historical twist. Actually, there was a whole shiloh where he passed away. It was only about 15 years ago, I think it was 2008, that they found his caver in Sfas. No one knew where he was buried for hundreds of years. They thought it was Turkey. They found the caver of his somewhere in the old cemetery in Sfas because somebody was moved away a couple of leaves, dug out a bit of dirt, and they saw the Matzeva, the Maharit. He's buried in Sfas. So he was he was known as an incredibly brilliant scholar, and he wrote very important Sfarim. He writes the whole idea of Bechlal making a kinyan with an act. Right? We made a deal. I'm selling and you want to buy. That should be good enough. Why does every transaction, every kinyan in Torah need to be accompanied with an act? And he says the reason is because until you do an act, we don't know if both parties are really serious. The act is just to demonstrate how serious this discussion really is. So it's just a technicality. It's just to resemble something else. That's the famous opinion of the Maharit, and Rabbi Kiva Eger goes with that as well. So in other words, you see from that opinion that the whole backbone of kinyanim is the whole measuring stick is how serious the parties really are. And therefore that would be the reason that you can't sell something which doesn't yet exist, because since the whole discussion is in theory, it's airy-fairy, how serious are the parties? So if you make a shavua, that'll take away that issue. That would be the simple logic. Once there's an oath, there's an oath. Either way, says the Rivash. Tshuva, you want to know what I think about it? Lav harosh zal v'loy harav Rabbeinu Yaakov chasimi Allah. On this tradition, there's no signature underneath with the Rosh's name or the Tur's name. This is just a hearsay tradition passing around, and this would have major ramifications in Dinei Mominus. Says the Rivash, it's very nice you have a tradition, but who's backing the tradition? I don't see the Rosh's name or the Tur's name underneath. Ve'eni roya litlois begavri ravra kavasayu svodazu. He says, Fakert, I don't even believe they said it. She'ein lo almasha tismach, such a logic which has nothing to base on except for a story in Chumash. I don't even believe they said it. Gam haraya sheviu bishmam, and the raya, let's discuss the raya. Ein lo ikr. It's not substantial. Afisha haya koydem hadibur, like you pointed out before Matan Torah. Bechlal, Taisus brings in Ma'id Katan, there's a well-known rule, we don't learn from before Matan Torah. The Avelos 7 days that Yosef did for his father, we don't learn from their Avelos 7 days. There is one shit of Ga'inim that holds 7 days Avelos is biblical because of that pasuk. Yosef made. We do Avelos 7 days, unfortunately. Some Ga'inim hold it's biblical because of the story of Yosef, but most Rishonim disagree and say you can't create a halacha based on what's written in the Chumash before Parshas Yisrael, before the episode of Matan Torah. That's why we hold 7 days are only rabbinic. The shilas, the first day might be deraisa, fine. But says the Rivash, Uman leimalon, who would tell us, Shaloi haya adam makna oz, davar shaloi bala. Maybe before Matan Torah you could bequeath things that don't yet exist. Maybe the law changed in the year 2448 when God gave us the Torah. If before Matan Torah you could sell something which doesn't yet exist, so what was the purpose of the oath? The shvu was just to expand Yaakov's power on the deal. Esav shouldn't renege on the deal. Yaakov knew Esav to be a swindler, a fast swindler, or could be a balgaiva, v'ish zroya, and a mighty person. In other words, an unscrupulous fellow. Therefore Yaakov made him swear, but it wasn't. The swearing was not a halachic tool to create this mechanism of bequeathing something which doesn't yet exist. This is the tshuva of the Rivash. So the Rivash says that his opinion is, do you know how Esav sold the Bechor? It's because before Matan Torah you could sell things which don't yet exist. So we have two opinions so far. We have this tradition of the Tur in the name of the Rosh. By the way, if you open up the Tur's Pirush on Chumash, you have the Baal HaTurim on Chumashim. That's only the excerpts. That's like the Gematrius and the cute stuff. But he has the Tur HaAruch, the long Pirush. In his Pirush, he quotes his father, the Rosh, saying this very thing. So there is a tradition. All right? Sometime maybe people wrote it in later. Just to. But no, it seems like Elamai, the Rivash, didn't see that. The Rivash is saying that logically he doesn't buy it. He's not guaranteeing the Rosh never said it. In other words, he's saying until you prove to me the Rosh said it, I don't believe it. If the Rosh Taka said it, then we'll deal with it. But the Rosh does say it. What?
There's another Torah that you once said was like added in, erased, and that you don't find it in
That
Sfarim.
was about Yaakov beating
Yaakov
up later. Let's not go there. That was the last share we did by your
did
father.
add stuff in,
I missed that.
or erase stuff.
But we spoke about spousal abuse both ways. About Chava beating up Adam until he ate from the fruit, and about Yaakov perhaps beating up Leah. That's a scary thing. Anyhow, that needs interpretation. So either way, we have two explanations of how Esav sold the Bechor. The Rosh says it's because he swore, and the Rivosh says it was before Matan Torah. Now, what's the logic of the Rivosh? Before Matan Torah, why does the Rivosh assume that before Matan Torah, monetary law was different? Like, why would that have changed? So there's a beautiful word from Yeshua Lev Kutner. He was one of the great Gaonim in the 1800s, in the times of he was in the Tzemach Tzedek's times, at Marash's times. His name actually always fascinating. He had three names. Listen to this. Yisrael, Eliyahu, Yoshua. Who was he named after? His father named him Yisrael after the Baal Shem Tov, Eliyahu after the Vilna Gaon, and Yoshua after the Pnei Yoshua. Mamish like Kilayim. Mamish, incredible mix. And he was born in the 1820s. So his father, would have overlapped with in years with some of these people. Not the Pnei Yeshua, but not the Baal Shem Tov, but maybe...
told him to get off the fence.
What? Exactly. A kid that nurses from numerous mothers. Anyhow, so this Yeshua Mikutna, he was one of the greatest Gaonim of his time, and he says the following svara. Before Matan Torah, the world wasn't set. The Gemara says in Shabbos, Rashi brings in Chumash, that until the year 2448, when the Yidden accepted the Torah, the world was shaky. The world hadn't reached the world wasn't calm because its whole creation was dependent on the Yidden accepting the Torah. And until the Yidden accepted the Torah, the world didn't even know what its fate was going to be. It could just disappear in a moment. In other words, it hadn't even deserved its right for existence until, that's why Yom HaShishi, the world was waiting until the 6th day of Sivan when the Yidden would accept the Torah. So says Yeshua Mikutna, until the year 2448, the whole world was something which was really yet to gain its existence. It was a davar shaloi bala elam. The whole world was something which didn't yet reach its purpose of existence, its right to exist even, and therefore the whole world was in an atmosphere of something which is only of the future. So therefore, monetarily as well, it could be that transactions would work in a davar shaloi bala elam. But once Matan Torah happened, and now everything is poel mamish, the world is stable and it's set and it exists. Now we deal with actuality, and no longer can you bequeath something which doesn't yet exist. That's the logic he gives.
Any sale before Matan Torah is questionable.
Fakert.
Was actually bought. I'm saying
He's using it to say fakert. So because the whole world was in an atmosphere of the future, so even sales of the future took effect. It took effect.
It doesn't work the way around.
No, this way. The fakir, everything worked. Not that nothing worked. Everything worked. Everything worked. I will tell you, though, that the great Shoyal Umeshiv, Rabbi Yosef Shaul Natanzon, now we would call him Nathanson, the great rabbi in Lvov, he has a big shaila on this Rivosh, a very simple question. The Rambam famously paskins, you can't bequeath something which doesn't yet exist. But if you take a vow, the Rambam says if you take a neder to give stock on something which you haven't yet gained, the vow is binding. A vow, I'm about to do a business deal. If I make X amount, I'll give, however much to stock. A vow is binding. A vow is binding. The Rambam says, how does he know a vow is different than a transaction? Because Yaakov makes a neder in Parshas Vayetze that if I go to love and then I come back in health, etc., and God, you stay with me, the chol asher tittenli, whatever you give, aser asenolach, I'll give meiser. And the Eibishter held Yaakov to task. In Parshas Vayishlach, the Eibishter says, no, Yaakov, when are you coming? So the Rambam says, you see, Yaakov was held responsible to fulfill his vow. That's what the Rambam says. Frekt Rabbi Yosef Shal Natanzon, according to the Rivosh, that before Matan Torah, you could bequeath something which doesn't yet exist. So maybe Yaakov's vow as well. The reason why it was effective was because it was before Matan Torah. How could the Rambam learn from there to now if those dinim were different before the Torah was given? That's a very strong kasha that he has on the Rivosh. L'chayre, in no way does this fit with that statement of the Rambam. Okay, but either way, this is the beginning of our discussion. This takes us to Vilna. About 250 years ago, there was a story. A fellow got married. And after a couple of weeks, he had enough. He divorces his wife. 3 weeks later, he marries another woman. Unbeknownst to him, his first wife conceived. Now she's divorced. She's carrying a baby. He married almost immediately another woman, and now she conceived. The second wife only carried her baby 6 months or so, 7 months, 6 months. Gives birth early. The first wife carried the baby to 9 months. So the baby that was born first was conceived second. The baby that was conceived first was born last. And you can imagine the families had a huge machlokes. Who's going to get who's the Bechor to get double portion of the father's inheritance?
There must be something to be gained, because otherwise it wouldn't be a fight.
It's like a Jeff Bezos situation.
Also, opinion of
So we know when it comes to Bechor, there's generally two dinim.
Offended by the mother.
Right.
They both get opinion.
Exactly. So let's just talk this through, because it's going to be very important. Generally, there's two dinim by Bechor. There's a Bechor lenachla, a Bechor for inheritance, and that's the father's firstborn. In other words, if a man marries a woman and she's had 20 kids in the past to other husbands, it doesn't matter. If she has a kid now with her husband, even though that boy is not a firstborn to the mother, it's a firstborn for the father. He is the Bechor for the father's inheritance. When it comes to a Bechor being holy, right, and having to come to put you on an old dingy plane and schlep you, a couple hours away, there's that's Petarechem, the one that opens the mother's womb. And there, if a man marries 10 wives and each of them, their first kid's a boy, the father's going to be doing Pidyon Ben 10 times. Fine. So this question came to the Vilna Gaon. L'chayre, if we translate Bechor as firstborn, then the firstborn kid was actually the second one conceived. But who said firstborn is actually the correct translation of Bechor? So the Vilna Gaon said, this is the story in Parshas Kiseitze. Let's read number 2. I know it's Psukim, but let's just see the Gra is going to have 3 kashas on the Psukim, and therefore is going to revolutionize the Pshat. It says, when a Kisiyano le'ishtei noshim, if a man has 2 wives, one that he loves, one that he hates, v'yoldu lo bonim, they have kids. Ho'ahuva v'hasnua. So it sounds like who gave birth first? The one that he loves. That's the order of the Chumash. But then the pasuk flips it. V'hoya haben habechor, the firstborn is lasni, the one that he hates. And then v'hoya b'yoyim hanchilo yezbonav, when it comes to be manchil, to bequeath inheritance to his kids, Eisa sheyila, whatever he has in possession at the time of his passing, lo yuchal levaker, he does not have the right to place the son of his beloved wife to be the Bechor instead of the son of the one that he hates, who is really the Bechor. Kiyes Bechor ben Asnua Yakir, he must own up to the fact that the firstborn is the one of the Snua, to give him double, Bechol Asher Yimotze Eloi, Ki hu reishis oinoi, very important, because this kid, the son of the Snua, is the beginning of his strength, of his seed. Loi mishpat ha-Bechor, he has the right to the firstborn. Says the Vilna Gaon 3 kashas. Number 1, a guy hates his wife. How could you hate your wife? V'hafta l'recha kamoicha, gotta love your friend. The Gemara said this talking about your wife, actually, that a person can't get married to a woman without seeing her, which is the whole kasha with Yitzchak, by the way. If Eliezer was a shliach for Yitzchak to marry Rivka, like Tosfos learns, many Rishonim learn, that means when Eliezer gave Rivka the bracelets, Rivka was now married to Yitzchak. He had never seen her. And the Gemara says in Kedushin that Rav holds you cannot marry a woman without seeing her first, because, what if, she has 2 noses? What if there's something about her which is unseemly you don't like? And says the Gemara, what's the problem? V'hafta l'recha kamoich. It applies to your wife too. The Gemara says an expression that a yid oyeva kagufa, you love your wife like yourself, or mechabdan, you honor her more than yourself. You honor her more than yourself. There's a Ritva. The Ritva says, just like if you own an Eved Ivri, a Jewish slave, the Yerushalmi says if you have one pillow, you have to give it. You have to give it to the Eved Ivri. So the Ritva says the same thing with your wife. He learned, it's a whole sugya about ribis and kiddushin, but he learns that when you acquire your wife's really acquiring you. Because if you only have one thing, you got to give it to her. Just like the Eved Ivri. Anyhow, the Gemara says you love her like yourself, you honor her even yosim for more than yourself. Either way, you can't hate your wife. Says the Gemara, what's going on? Why is the Torah talking about this fellow that hates his wife? Okay, that's a cute question. The other questions are more serious. The Torah first starts off saying that the Ahuva gave birth, then the Snua, and then it says, no, the firstborn was to the Sneah. That's a contradiction. And then he has a third question. The Torah says you can't play with who's the firstborn. Of course you can't. Why would you think that you could arbitrarily choose who the firstborn is? It's a fact. It's a fact of nature. It's a Metzias. Why would the Torah have to say, don't think that you could choose who's the firstborn? Of course you can't. The firstborn is firstborn. So says the Vilna Gaon, you have to understand what happened over here. This is the story of Vilna. A guy married 2 women. First he married one woman, and then he divorced her. Why did he divorce her? Not because he hates her. You're allowed to divorce. The Torah seems to say clearly, you can, later on in Kiseitse, you can divorce your wife if you found the Erev Stov or something negative in her. In other words, she wasn't being faithful. In fact, Beis Shammai holds you can't divorce unless you found some evidence to that unfortunate behavior. So therefore, she's sneal, you hate her, either because it means she's hated to heaven because her actions are hated, or chveis, you're allowed to hate her Russia. That's why there's an issue between the husband and the wife. Because she was unfaithful, that's why he divorced her. He divorced her and it was quick. Unbeknownst to the man, she's expecting. Okay? Then, doesn't want to be a bachelor too long, he marries another woman. She's ahuva. What does it mean he loves her? Because she's faithful, she's kosher, she's acting properly. He marries the ahuva, and then she conceives. Who gave birth first? The ahuva gave birth first. The woman that he married second only carries a baby 6-7 months. She gave birth first. Then the snua gives birth because she held her baby 9 months. But says the Torah, who was the firstborn? The one that was conceived first. Which means firstborn is a wrong translation, says the Vilna Gaon. Bechor does not mean firstborn. Because in this case, the Bechor precisely goes to the kid that was born later, because he was conceived first. And says the Vilna Gaon, that's why the father may have thought, I want to transfer the rights to the Ben Ahu because he's born first. That's the Havamina the father might have. So the Torah says, no, you can't do that. Kihu reishis oino, you have to follow the first seed, the one that conceived first. So that's how he answered all 3 kashas by making this halacha, that Bechor is not the firstborn, it's the first conceived. This is the psak that he gave. Reb Shloime Kluger, one of the great Rabbanim 150, 200 years ago, he wrote a Pirush on Shulchan Aruch called Chochmas Shloime, and he quotes this halacha in the name of Reb Chaim Volozhner. Reb Chaim Volozhner, he says Reb Chaim Volozhner gave this psak. Same psak. The same psak as the Gemara.
The same Maharal at the end.
Maharal?
At the end. Ayin Gamkin, Megillas Esther, Maharal Mikra.
Oh, over there. I'm not holding there yet. That shouldn't even be on the paper.
I thought you did that.
No, I was reading just number 2. No, I just read number 2. 3, 4, and 5 are excerpts from a Sefer Pardes Yosef. No, I'll get to each one at the appropriate time. Right, yeah. So the Chidah quotes it also, though, from the Maharam Chaviv, one of the great, Moshe Chaviv, one of the great Sfardische Gaonim in Eretz Yisrael about 300 years ago, apparently also says this. Yeah, there are many who argue, but it's sourced the Vilna Gaon, Reb Chaim Volozhner.
Who's Chaim Volozhner?
Who's Chaim Volozhner? Chaim Volozhner was the student of the Vilna Gaon. Had many great students. According to many, he was the chief student of the Vilna Gaon. There's lots of beautiful stories that he had with his Rebbe. I mean, he was... The Friedrich Rebbe often writes, but the Friedrich Rebbe writes that there were numerous groups amongst the Misnagdim. The Friedrich Rebbe says there were those there were those misnagdim who were fighting Chassidus just because they wanted the fight. And therefore, even if they would they would see proof today or tomorrow about the piety of the Chassidim, it wouldn't really make a difference to them. They wanted the fire to keep on burning. But there was another group, says the Frierdiker Rebbe, of misnagdim that were earnestly concerned of the welfare of Yiddishkeit due to what Chassidus was. It was growing like wildfire and it was all new. But the Frierdiker Rebbe says that in this group, when they finally came around and saw that Chassidus was not only not damaging, it was beneficial, so they stopped fighting and fakert. They saw it maybe as a positive thing. And the Frierdiker Rebbe lists Reb Chaim Volozhin as part of the second group. In fact, Reb Chaim Volozhiner, he once had a student, one of his greatest students, that told him that he's leaving. He's going to the Chassidim. And Reb Chaim Volozhiner told him, as the Geis shine, if you're going already, gay in Liadi. Go to Liadi or Liozhna, depending on what year this happened. Once you're leaving, go to the Alter Rebbe, he told him. Because once you're going to the Chassidim, I once actually had a Talmud of mine who left and he went to a different Chassidus. And I told him, don't you know, Chaim Volozhner told his student, if you're leaving the Litvish, if you're leaving what everybody's doing, there's only one place you go. The Geis shine, Gates of Malton Rebbe. Anyhow, he actually today is the yard side of his Rebbe. I'll just tell you for a second. Reb Chaim Volozhiner, so when he was younger, he was in Volozhin. His parents actually for a number of years didn't have kids. In Volozhin at that time was living the Shagas Arya. Reb Arya Leib Ginsburg was in Volozhin. And,
Where?
Sorry?
Which is where?
Lithuania area. And there was only one full set of Shas in the entire Volozhin. And this couple, Reb Chaim Volozhin's parents, who didn't have kids yet, they had the Shas. The Shagasari knocks on the door, and he wants to borrow a Masechta. In fact, he wants to borrow 2 Masechtas. So the husband said, listen, usually the rule is 1 sefer at a time, but for you, the Rav, the Shagasariya, you can take as many Sfarim as you want. You want 2, take 2. So the Shagasariya told him, in return for you allowing me to take 2 Sfarim, may the Eibishter bench you to have 2 kids that will lighten up the world in Torah. And one of the kids was Reb Chaim Volozhiner. The other one was Reb Zalman of Volozhin, who was also a fascinating Gaon. Unfortunately, he died a young man. Reb Chaim Volozhiner was a student of the Shagas Arya, a student of the Vilna Gaon. He was also a student of Reb Fall Hamburger, whose yard site is today, parenthetically. Exactly. Fall Khan's named after him, right. Reb Fall Hamburger. And Reb Fall Hamburger was originally, he himself was a student of the Shagas Arya, and then he was the teacher of Chaim Volozhiner, and he was also a student of the Vilna Gaon. And Rebbe Fall Hamburger once ended up visiting the Maggid of Mizrich. There's a whole story. The Maggid got Rebbe Zusha to get Rebbe Fall to come to Mizrich. When the Vilna Gaon heard that Rebbe Fall Hamburger went to Mizrich, he told him he can't go there anymore. So Rebbe Fall decided, listen, I'm not going to go to Mizrich anymore because my Rebbe, the Gaon, told me not to. But I'm not going to Vilna anymore either. And he stopped. And then he moved to Germany, and then his, he was far away. What? So there's many opinions who that person was who didn't want to, the whole Malach thing. There's many opinions who that person was. Right, there's the famous story, once Rebensha mentioned. There's a famous story that by one of these Litvische Gaonim, they were shown a piece of paper, a cherem against the Chassidim, and this Gaon, whoever it was, we'll see who it was asked, could you please sign? And he was told, even the Vilna Gaon, who's an angel of God, signed. So this Litvische Gaon said, by the Akedah, when the Eibishter wanted to tell Avram to Shecht Yitzchak, he came himself. The Eibishter spoke to Avram. When it came to sparing Yitzchak, a Malach came. What does that teach you? That when it comes to saving someone's life, it's enough to hear from a Malach. When it comes to shechting someone, you got to hear from God himself. So the Vilna Gaon might be an angel, but when it comes to shechting people, you got to hear from God himself. Many Misnagdim say the story was with Chaim Volozhiner. He was the person who said this. I highly doubt it. It doesn't really make sense that he would say that about his Rebbe, the Vilna Gaon, even though it's not offensive to the Vilna Gaon, but he held the Gaon in such esteem, I can't imagine he would even say that. Many say it was Rafal Hamburger who was the person, But many times, actually, I think this is the correct version. It was Avram Abele Fasvaler, who was the Av Bezin of Vilna. And we actually have a tradition that this is quoted in Sfarim. I wasn't there, so I can't tell you, but to me this makes sense. Who am I? But he once met up with the Tzemach Tzedek, who was much younger than him. And they were speaking in Nigla. And this Rabbi Avram Abele, the Av Bezin of Vilna, he tells the Tzemach Tzedek, "Ihr seid doch a junger Mann. Wie kommt euch so viel? You're a young man. How do you know so much? Like you're young." The Tzemach Tzedek said, "I got a bracha from my Zayde. What we learn once, we never forget. We never forget." So Avram Abele said that I want to tell you something that happened to me, and he told him this thing, that he was the fellow that was asked to sign, and he said, "Listen, only if God himself tells you to shech." So there's lots of traditions, but yeah, many say it was Rebbe Fall Hamburger who was this fellow. Many do say that, and he passed away today. So he was a student of the Vilna Gaon, and he was also a Rebbe of Reb Chaim Volozhiner. So either way, Reb Chaim Volozhiner was one of the greatest. He was a Goyen God, there's no question, and he was a Kabbalist as well. He opened up the famous Volozhiner Yeshiva, the mother of all yeshivas, until Tomchei Tmimim came. In fact, when Chaim Volozhiner wanted to open the yeshiva, he first came to the Vilna Gaon. And he said, "I want to open up a yeshiva." And the Vilna Gaon, he didn't want. He said, "No. A year later or so, Reb Chaim Volozhiner comes back, and he says to the Vilna Gaon, "I want to open the yeshiva." And he was still just as passionate as a year before. So the Gra said, from the very fact that you have the same passion a year later, it means it's coming from the Gute Zeit. At the time when you asked me, I didn't know where it was coming from. I don't know, maybe you want the yeshiva for fame or this and that. I don't know where it was coming from. But if so much time has passed and the passion is still there, is a riot coming from the correct side, and therefore go ahead and make the yeshiva.
Sleep with gloves, no?
That was his brother, Zalman Volozhiner. Zalman Volozhiner, sleeping gloves. Yeah. Funny character. But he was, listen, these people were enormous. It's crazy, that wasn't so long ago. Anyhow, so the Vilna Gaon, Reb Chaim Volozhiner, the Maram Chaviv, they all give this psak. The kasha is, Rabbi Isai, the $1 million question is, we say that Yaakov and Esav, we know they were twins, right? Yaakov was born first. So Rashi quotes the mashal, you have a tube, if you put two pebbles in a tube, the one that goes in first goes all the way to the back of the tube. It's the one that goes in later comes out first. So too with Yaakov and Esav, who were twins. First, Yaakov was conceived, then Esav, but Esav has the front row and he comes out first. And therefore Rashi says that Yaakov really in some way was the firstborn, right? In some way, but halachically, the fact is he had to buy it from Esav, did he not? If he had to buy it from Esav, doesn't that show that who was halachically the firstborn? Esav, even though Yaakov was the first conceived. That throws the Vilna Gaon psak out the window. The Vilna Gaon, Reb Chaim Volozhiner, the Maram Chaviv, all those that paskin that Bechor is the first conceived, right? You see from today's Chumash, Yaakov and Esav, it's befedish not the case. Although Yaakov was conceived first, that's the whole medrash that we quote, nevertheless, Esav was halachically the firstborn. I mean, so what in the world was the Vilna Gaon thinking? Who asked his kasha? Again, Rabbi Yosef Shol Natanson, the Shoel Omeshev, says that he doesn't believe the Vilna Gaon said this. The whole thing is a farce. It makes no sense. Every kid in Cheder knows this Rashi about Yaakov and Esav. Everybody knows that you go after the firstborn. That's why it's called firstborn, right? It's not called first conceived. This is the big kasha of the Shoel Omeshev. So what's the answer? As simple and as big as the kasha is, there's just as simple and big an answer. In the case of Yaakov and Esav, there was one mother. In the case of the Vilna Gaon story, there's two women. What's the difference? In the case of the Vilna Gaon, both kids were halachically firstborns as far as the halacha of redeeming from a kohen. In the Vilna Gaon story in Vilna, and the way he's reading the story in Kisei, there's two women. Each of them have a firstborn boy. Each boy is halachically categorized as a firstborn, as far as being Peterechem, the first of the womb, and has to be redeemed by giving the money to the kohen. So both are a Bechor. Now the shaila is, one of them was born first, one was conceived first. Over there we're going to say conception will override birth. But by Yaakov and Esav, only Esav was a Peterechem. Yaakov Bechlal is not even halachically identified as a Bechor at all, because there's only one womb. Over here, it's all, the be-all and end-all will be Esav. So therefore, that's just a simple answer how it's not a kasha. So where does this lead us to? So I'm going to read, we're going to go through the other shtick in just a moment. It'll be pretty quick. The Ktsois HaChoshen, the great Gaon, the Ktsois HaChoshen. So he was in the times of the Alter Rebbe. In fact, he was born and died the exact same years as the Alter Rebbe. Aryeh Leib Heller was his name. And he was a Bissel Misnagid, but he was an incredible Gaon. And the Tzemach Tzedek even quotes him in some of his tshuvas. And the Rebbe said very big things. The Rebbe said if a Bechor walks down the street and you meet a Misnagid, and you don't know a famous essay of the Ktsois HaChoshen, or one of his other Sfarim, Shev Shmaitze, the Misnagid is going to say, what? And the Rebbe says, you've disgraced the honor of all the Rabbeim, very sharp words. So that's why in Yeshivas we spend a lot of time learning the Ktsois HaChoshen. Whether we understand it or not is a different question. That he does, he actually, the Ktsois HaChoshen writes, I'm trying to write as clear as I can in order, Laman Yodutz HaKoirah, anyone that reads it can just zip through everything that I write. Apparently time has changed. Maybe 200 years ago they were able to do that. Now it's a little more difficult. But he's fascinating. Anyhow, the Ktsois HaChoshen is real pilpulim in halacha, but he also has a little discussion about Yaakov and Esav. He throws it in one of his discussions, and he says, you know how Esav sold the firstborn? He says there's a rule, if something doesn't yet exist, you can't bequeath it, but you could pull away your rights from it. It's called siluk. You could remove your rights from something which doesn't yet exist, and when the item will come to existence, you have no rights to it.
Where do we see that?
It's bad. It's from the Ramam. That's already earlier. There's an union of siluk you're allowed to do. You can remove yourself from any future rights you would have, and when the item then is born into the world, you know,
it might be heftier than the guy grabbing.
Right, perhaps, right.
Denouncing his rights.
Exactly. So he says Esav was just denouncing his rights, renouncing his rights. Esav was removing himself. So everybody asks on the Ktsois HaChoshen, in the last 200 years, every Rosh Hashiva asks, that explains how Esav got out of the picture. But how did Yaakov acquire it? When it comes to acquisition, there's two parties, right? It takes two to tango. Esav pulled away. But how did Yaakov acquire it? So they say, based on this Vilna Gaon, it makes sense. Yaakov is be'emes a shtickle bechor because he's the first conceived. It's just since Esav came out of the womb before him, Esav got in the way of Yaakov being able to claim firstborn rights. Once Esav removes himself and is gone, which he can, you could remove yourself from something which doesn't yet exist. You can masalik yourself. Automatically it's going to fall to Yaakov's lap. Why? Because he does have halachic rights to it, because he is somehow the firstborn due to the fact that he's the first conceived. So that's another answer how Esav sold the firstborn. What?
You need a transaction, though.
In order for Esav to remove himself. For that
You don't
siluk.
need a transaction to remove yourself. You need him to say that he's removing himself.
Okay, all right.
Why does it have to be between two people?
No, maybe siluk taka. Maybe siluk taka needs a kinyan. Maybe needs a kinyan. Perhaps maybe to remove yourself for something which doesn't yet exist, you need to do a kinyan, or else we don't know if you're being serious.
It wouldn't
don't know
fall
if
to the
you're being
next child
serious.
regardless if the kid was conceived first.
What?
Or not. It wouldn't fall into the next child regardless if he was conceived first.
No. You have to be a bechor. No. There's no
That's it.
pishnaim. Right. If the firstborn, there is an interesting thing. There's a halacha. You have to honor your older sibling, right? So there's a big debate. Does that apply to an older brother, or even to an older sister? So that the Shavus Yankov says only a brother. The Chidah says even a sister.
He used to say that it does.
Yeah, the Chidah holds even an older sister. The Shal is a dafka the oldest or anyone older. So some poskim hold it's dafka the oldest, but if that person should pass away, it'll fall down to the next brother. So that's an interesting case where it actually falls down to the next. But Pishnayim, getting double wouldn't. Anyhow, so this is like, if you put the Vilna Gaon and the Ktsois together, you get another explanation of how Esav sold the firstborn. But I just want to say a couple things. Mamish fascinating. Let's jump to first of all, the bottom paragraph, because this is a whopper. Chak Admur Baal Halev Simcha Zatzal Migur. The great Gerer Rebbe, the Lev Simcha, not too long ago. He was a Rebbe in the 70s and the 80s. He was a big Rebbe of Ger. Omar Levar, he said, based on this, B'masha Omar Yankov Avinu. Yaakov, in Parshas Vayechi, Yaakov switches his hands, right? And he tells Yosef, Yodati b'ni, right? Yosef wants to put Yaakov's hands, make sure the right one's on Menashe, but Yaakov, no, Yaakov is holding his hands tight. He says, Yodati b'ni Yodati. He said, I know my child, I know. What did he mean? Dihine machloikus Yaakov Esav legabi habechera hoisapi divrei Rashi. The machloikus of Yaakov and Esav. Yaakov really felt he was a Bechor because he was first conceived, right? Like the Vilna Gaon said. Yaakov felt he really had some rights to the Bechor. Because the Hayotze Rishon Nichnas Achron, the famous Rashi, that whoever comes out first means he entered last, that's Esav. Imken Yaakov Havalei Da Nichnas Rishon, Yaakov Svirales. Yaakov thought that since he entered first, Afal Pisha Yotze Achron, even though I came out last, I'm really the Bechor, V'lochin Kana HaBechor, and that's why Yaakov pushed himself to buy the Bechor. By the way, if you look in Tosfos on the Parsha, Hadar's Kainim, he says clearly that Yaakov really had rights to the Bechor. Yaakov had rights to the Bechor because he was first conceived. If you look in the Tur's Pirish in Chumash today, the Tur brings it and he says, Baba Maisis, it's all about being firstborn. So you see, it's already an old debate from the Rishonim already. And the Hadar's Kainim says Yaakov really was the Bechor because he's firstborn. But here's the thing. Menashe and Ephraim were also twins, like it says in Seder Adoros. You ever heard that? Menashe and Ephraim were twins. The Radak, in his Pirish on Chumash, says, what's the Raya? Because it says in Parshas Miketz, Ula Yosef Yula, to Yosef was born two kids. It's written together. It's not two separate stories. To Yosef was born two kids. It's twins. Who came out first? Menashe. But that means who was formed first? Ephraim.
General rule.
So Yaakov is telling Yosef, Yodati b'ni Yodati. This is an old opinion of mine. This is an old shit I've had for years. I always hold that the one that's conceived first is the first one. Just like I believed I was really older than Esav, I think Ephraim's really older than Menashe.
We learn differently.
Yeah, this is not the Pashup Shot, but this is also a Pshat. Imken Gam Kam L'Shittas Yankov. Yankov is saying Ephraim was the real Bechor. That's Pshat Yodati b'ni Yodati. Ani L'Shitasi. This is an old opinion of mine. I believe Ephraim is the Bechor and not Menashe.
But I'm saying, my question is, who gives us the pshat that we learned today, the regular pshat?
Rashi.
Does that come from Rashi?
Of
why
what?
he switched his hands?
Yeah.
So why didn't Rashi teach us the simple thing? He could have said, look, they're twins, he came out first like Yaakov, boom, it's been done. Why didn't he have to do
The reason is because simply, even by Yaakov and Esav was halachically the Bechor. Yaakov had to buy it from him.
Okay.
We're just saying the reason that Yaakov made it such a big deal to buy it is because Yaakov felt he really owned it. But ultimately, he had to buy it from Esav. So ultimately, Menashe is the Bechor. This is like a cute word to say that in theory, Ephraim's the Bechor. Practically, Menashe, just like practically Yaakov did have to buy from Esav. So let's go to the left side for a second. This really bothered me, this thing. I was debating if we should discuss it. But here, when it comes to twins, we know there's two types of twins. We definitely know today you can have identical twins and not identical. What's the difference? Identical twins is from the same zera, from the same seed, the same egg. Okay, fine, the same egg. But non-identical is two different conceptions. Some want a taina that you know what the Vilna Gaon is going to do with Yaakov and Esav. We gave one answer because when it's the same womb, right, then ultimately the one that comes out first is the Bechor. Some wanted to say that according to the Vilna Gaon, Yaakov and Esav were really the same egg. Well, they call the same zera, but the same egg that split. In fact, Yaakov and Esav were identical. There's a Medrash Tehillim that says that when was Esav killed? It's a big machlokes, but there's an opinion in Medrash Tehillim that says when Yitzchak passed away, Yaakov and Esav went to bury Yitzchak in the Maras HaMachpelah. And Yaakov and Esav were there by themselves. Everybody left to give them some peace, and they were crying. And Yehuda says, oy. Esav said, Yikruvu Yemei Evel Avi. Esav said, let's wait till Yitzchak dies, and I'll kill Yaakov. This is his chance. Yehuda runs in, and he sees Esav about to kill his father, Yaakov. So Yehuda, Yodcha Ba'eref Eivecha, he kills Esav from the back. So the Medrash says, from the back? Coward! You kill someone from the front. So the Medrash says, Esav looked just like Yaakov. And therefore Yehuda couldn't kill Esav from the front. just like his father. Couldn't do it. He had to kill him from the back.
What about the hairy?
The hair, the red. It says okay, but it says in Medrash. Right. That's as far as the hair, but as far as identical, they were identical. They were identical. I will tell you, even Rachel and Leah, by the way, this is a fascinating thing. Lavan says to Yaakov, how can I marry Rachel to you? In our place, we don't flip around the older and the younger, right? He was teasing Yaakov. Bim Kameinu, we don't flip around the older and the younger. By us, Leah is the older one, you marry Leah. This is quoted in Halacha. In Halacha, we paskin that you're supposed to marry off the older, the younger. The older, thank you, before the younger. And we quote this pasuk, Rabbeinu Tam quoted. Rabbeinu Tam, in fact, wanted to say, if you tell a father, I'm marrying your daughter, and you give him the money, and there's a few daughters, Rabbeinu Tam went so far to say, l'chayr, we should assume it's the oldest one, because the minhag is always to marry the oldest one. So everybody asked, so what was Yaakov thinking? Didn't Yaakov know about this? How did Yaakov think he could pass over Leah to marry Rachel? So the Radak says that Rachel and Leah were also twins. They were also twins. Exactly. In fact, by the way, some hold, the Radak says that Rachel and Leah were identical. Yeah. The fact they were twins is already in Medrash and say, they're Oila, Medrash, Tanchuma, but the Radaks are identical except for the eyes. Except for the eyes. Otherwise, they were identical. Now, the Rashbam says the eye thing, Leah had soft eyes, she had light color like blue eyes, green eyes, and Rachel had dark eyes. That was just the difference. But otherwise, it could have been identical.
Alone, he despised one and liked the other one. Just the eyes.
That was the crying part.
That's what that's the Gemara and Rashi. Anyhow, so the idea is exactly, just like Rachel and Leah were twins, so Yaakov said the same thing, that Leah came out first, but Rachel's conceived first. So again, just like you said. Yeah, right. So Yaakov said, no, I believe you have to marry the older one. I Taina, Rachel's the older one. Right. Anyhow, but over here, look at this. Biyaris Tvash, that's in the left-hand side. Biyaris, that's Yonis and Ibishis. He says like this, Kvar hiskimu hativim. The scientists have already come to a conclusion. A woman cannot have twins from one bia, only from two bias. Now, this is not a fact, but he says that twins have to come from two bias, and his proof is from today's Chumash. V'chein kosav Rashi gabe Yaakov Esav, says Yonis and Ibis by Yaakov and Esav, mashal l'shfeifer, it's a mashal to the tube. The one that goes in comes out last. Val Korchach says of Yensen Svir Le Mishnei Bias Nisabra. The whole medrash that Rashi is quoting has to be that it's from two different bias, because if it's from one tippa, then it doesn't make sense. One went in first and the other one later. In other words, Yensen Ibish is saying the whole mashal that we're basing the whole shira on has to be that Yaakov and Esav were born from two different bias, because if it's one bia, then no one's first, no one's second. It's the same time. And he proves from here that it must be all twins are from two different bias. The Noid Yehuda says the opposite. Shekasav le Hagoin Rabbi Yeshaya Fik Shemotza b'Sefer Drush. He found in a Sefer Drush, possibly the Yaris Dvash, that it's impossible for twins to come from one bia.
The same thing.
Right, it has to be from two. And the Noid Yehuda says back, Divrei Hadrush Heima Hevel Havolim. That drush that you saw is Baba Mises. Neged kam kermit b'shas. Forget about doctors. It's against Gemara. Va'adrab. He says fakert nepachur. It's just the other way around. Ef shalol isaber tubi can't be from two beats one after the other. That they should both survive because one of them would be a sandal. Umashehayid b'shem chachme hateva. This that l'cher b'yirn quotes from the scientist Sheker Hayid is false.
He's right, though, because once a woman gets pregnant, you can't become pregnant again. You're going to ruin the other child.
A sandal is a kid that gets stepped upon. In other words, they would kill each other.
They would absorb the other.
Yeah, exactly, inside the sack. They wouldn't both come out alive. So, no. It wouldn't, right. It wouldn't develop. It would, but upon him, this is like this is like one of the strangest machlokes you ever see. L'chayra, we know when it comes to identical twins, they're taken from the same time. If they're not identical, then you can apply the mashal of Rashi. So in other words, if Yaakov and Esav were identical, then the Chayra, they were from the same bia, the same tippa, the same egg. And then that's another answer for the Vilna Gaon. The Vilna Gaon would say, in my story in Vilna, one was born first, one was conceived first. But if Yaakov and Esav were identical, like the Medrash Tilim says, then they're conceived the same time. So Taka Esav's the Bechor. But if they weren't identical, right, which is the skin and the hair would tell you, then it's two different bias, and then the Vilna Gaon would have a kasha, why isn't Yaakov the real firstborn? And then we'll have to give the answer we said before, that when there's only one womb, ultimately the one that comes out first. So that is like very, very strange. This is from the Sefer Pardes Yosef, but he's just quoting, anyhow, but on number, it was finished with this, on the right-hand side, there's a piece over here, that... The Ayin Sham, this is also from the Pardes Yosef, it was just easiest to quote from here, instead of making different copies from the Svarim. The Ayin Sham Shekosav Ta'am Lahagra. See there that he quotes a reason for the Vilna Gaon. Now there, I'm not sure what there is. It's not clear what the there that he's quoting from is, but a simple logic why Taka firstborn rights should go to conception and not to birth. But you know, this mamash has to do with the whole discussion of abortion as well. It has to do with when is a kid really considered to be alive. The Vilna Gaon's psak only makes sense if a kid in utero is considered a being, right? If everything happens by birth, then obviously the kid that's born birth is the real Bechor. The Vilna Gaon's pshat only works if a kid is considered to be mamash and existent, a being in utero. Right. So when it comes to abortion, though, you're talking not chayiv mis if you kill the kid. Right. A goy is. By a yid, there are generally four opinions of why abortion's a problem. Some very extreme, some quite lenient. The most lenient is the Maharit, the great Maharit we quoted before. He says abortion's only a problem because it's chabola, you're hurting yourself. Just like you can't cut off your finger, you can't kill the baby. The reason that that's very lenient is because you are allowed to cut off your finger if there's a strong need. Right? In other words, if the issue is only that she's choivel in herself, there's lots of grounds to be lenient if it's necessary. A little bit higher than that, perhaps, is the Chavos Yoyer, the great Chavos Yoyer. The Chavos Yoyer, big Rav in Germany in the 1600s, he tainas it's Zera Levatollah. It's the ultimate Zera Levatollah. What's the issue with wasted seed? It's potential life. A fetus in the womb, that's the ultimate of potential life. What it is Zera Levatollah, which I'll tell you parenthetically, very hard to say that word. Rabbeinu Tam has a famous, Rabbeinu Tam Paskins, it's only an issue for Zera Levatollah if you have a mitzvah of Pru Revu. Only those that have a mitzvah of Pru Revu have a prohibition of Zera Levatollah. Says Rabbeinu Tam, a woman who doesn't have a mitzvah of having kids does not have a prohibition of wasting seed. Therefore, after intimacy, a woman would be allowed to get rid of the Zera. What?
A man doesn't either have a mitzvah if he already had kids.
He doesn't have a chiyuv, he still has a mitzvah. Every time you do it, you fulfill another mitzvah. The mitzvah still exists. There's no obligation, biblically. Rabbinically, there still is. You still try and have. But that's Rabbeinu Tam's opinion. So here's the funny thing, though. Goyim don't have a chiyuv of Pru Revu. They don't have the chiyuvs given to Yidden. So according to Rabbeinu Tam, they shouldn't have an isur of Zera Levatollah. According to the Chavos Yoyer, the whole idea of abortion is Zera Levatollah. How ironic is it that a goy gets killed for abortion and not a Jew? If the issue is Zera Levatollah, right? According to Rabbeinu Tam, a goy is no problem with Zera Levatollah. How would it work that Dafka goy gets killed for abortion and not a Jew? Very strange. But that's the Chavos Yoyer said it's Zera Levatollah. A stage above is the Maharam Shik. The Maharam Shik says it's halfway to murder. It's chatzi shir of murder. Why? Because you're murdering a half human being. The Maharam Shik was a student of the Chassam Sofer. He says a fetus is half a human being. So abortion is half murder. It's half murder because you're killing a half human being. The Rogachover tainas that it's mamash retzicha. The reason you don't get killed is, we learn from Sukkim, there's a loophole. There's a loophole for whatever the reason is, you don't get killed. But it's mamish murder. What?
Should get killed.
That's why Goy gets killed. There's a loophole. Let's say, because, when the Eidim warn you, how do they know for sure that the kid won't be a miscarriage? So therefore, there's a problem with the warning of the Eidim, etc., etc. So Al Kapanim, the Vilna Gaon's pshat really only works. the Vilna Gaon Pshat works according to the Rogat that it's mamish murder, the kid's mamish a kid, then it makes sense that he's there, he was conceived first, he exists first. He should inherit. But I'll just finish with the thing on the side of V'ayin Sham, that the reason for the Gra, that a Bechor l'Nachla Talya b'Yitzira, why would it be that the firstborn for Nachla depends on the formation? Ule'inyan Kedushas Bechor, but when it comes to redeeming from the Kohen, it depends on Petei Rechem, on exiting the womb of birth. Al Pi Masha Amru b'Megillah, we say by Esther, Ibarta, when her mother was expecting her, Meisavia, Esther's father died. Yoladata, when Esther's mother bore her, Meisa Ima, her mother died. Fine, that's a pretty simple Gemara. Rashi says the following: V'nimtza shaloi hoya la'av. She didn't have a tata. Misha shenira l'hikaras av. From the moment her father would have the title of father, he was gone. Meaning, when does a father have the title of father? Once he does his deeds, then his father's out of the picture. Once the conceptions happen, that's when the father should have his title. But by Esther, the father died, so her father never had that title. Ukashiyolda, when the mother gave birth, Mason, the mother died. Shaloi Niris, the Karsem, so she never deserved her title. What do you see from Rashi? The father and mother get their titles at different stages. Hare Diyesh Hedel, there's a difference. And Av Mishas Yitzira. The father gets his title from conception. That's really when the father leaves. Nothing happens to the father by birth, right? You know the joke where the father's walking up and down the corridor, right? The nurses say, "Congratulations, you had a girl." Thank God she won't have to go through what I went through.
Many doesn't know anything about it.
Exactly. Harry, Diyesh Hevdel and Av Mishas Yitzira. The father is really out of the picture from formation. The aim, the mother from Leda. So from that Rashi, the Vilna Gaon Psak actually makes a lot of sense. Shapi Bechor l'Nachla. When it comes to getting double, it's all about how you first went to your father. Your father became your father by conception. Tal Ye'iku Bechor la'Av, and your father came your father when you were formed. But Kedushas Bechora, who's the firstborn as far as being redeemed by a Kohen, that Tal Bechor la'Aim, that depends by the mother. And when does your mother become your mother? For the time of birth. And therefore it depends on Petei Rechem of the mother. Sakoponim, that's a very interesting logic for the Psak of the Vilna Gaon. You always after, you can go already. You always go after conception. Today's Chumash, Esav was the Bechor, so either they were identical twins and Yaakov was not the first to conception, but that kind of slugs up the whole Medrash Rashi quotes of Yaakov going in first. If you say that Taka Yaakov went in first, you have to say that when there's one mother,
That's it. You're staying. You're staying here.
right.
Another one.
All right, we're done.
Go to the recording. We'll chazer last year.
20 minutes.